Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our April Tuesday Talk. Before I introduce our guest speakers tonight, just want to take a moment to outline the format for our session. After a brief introduction, the speakers will be speaking to us. If you have questions for our speakers, please put them in the chat. We have our District Governor-elect, Joseph Ziosa, and District Governor nominee, John Burns. They're going to be monitoring the chat. So after Janice and Danielle finish their presentation, there may be questions that you would like us to ask. So please put those in the chat. Charles always already reminded you, but I will do it again. Please make sure you're mute. After my introduction and our speakers' presentations, we will have a thank you from our District Governor, Ron Dick, and then we'll have a brief introduction to our May Tuesday Talks. So, my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Janice MacDonald, Acting Staff Sergeant of Operations, and Danielle McKeen, who's a Detective Constable, and they are both from the Cobourg Police Service. They are going to provide us tonight with a working definition of human trafficking and show us signs to look for, the red flags, including the basics of grooming and the common risk factors for victims. They will discuss statistics, both on a provincial level as well as a local perspective. So Janice and Danielle, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation tonight on human trafficking.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us. So we're having a little bit of technical issues, so you'll see Danielle on the screen is joining the meeting because we're not great with technology, or I'm not. So hopefully you can hear us okay and see us. So I don't think I've shared my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes, just sharing is working.
Hopefully you can see it. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and skip to the first one.
Yes, we can see the picture of the motel.
Okay, perfect. So I guess we're just going to start. I don't know if you want to start, which is
Sure. So this just outlines what the definition of human trafficking is. So there's 3 elements to human trafficking: an acts, a means, and a purpose. And in order for there to be human trafficking, all 3 of those elements need to exist. It doesn't have to be all of the things under each element, but at least one. So under acts, it can be the recruitment of a person, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. And I guess specifically just with this presentation, we're talking about human sex trafficking. There are other forms of human trafficking, like labor trafficking and organ trafficking as well, but we're going to focus specifically on sex trafficking. The second is the means, which is how they traffic the person. So whether it's through use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, or giving payments. And then the third category is the purpose. So it's the why are they doing the trafficking. And like I said, that could be forced labor, removal of organs, slavery. And we're going to focus more on the prostitution and sexual exploitation of others.
When we talk about human trafficking, there's basic stages of grooming that we see traffickers generally go through, and it's pretty common in lots of different ways. The people that we're going to specifically talk about are really, really good at finding the right victims and being able to find those cracks that those young ladies, I mean, I'm going to say ladies, I mean, anyone can be human trafficked. It's not female specific. Certainly there are males that have already, that have been victims as well, but certainly these people are really, really good at finding people that they can target as victims. You know, we all have parts of ourselves that we're insecure about, that we don't feel great about, and we have a tendency to wear those very clearly to these people because they're so good at finding people's weaknesses. So they target people for a very specific reason. They find people who don't feel great about themselves, can, you know, show signs of low self-esteem, maybe don't have a huge circle of friends, and they begin to form a relationship with those people. So they're trying to gain their trust and get to know them, and quickly they will know everything about these people. It'll be, you know, whether they post something online that says like, I hate my parents, I'm not having a great day, you know, and they'll start asking the questions like, what's going on? And they want to start forming a bond to take them away from other people.
And yeah, that's a lot of times that's how this starts, is through social media. With young people, most young people have social media. A lot of young people have Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those that are open to the public. And a lot of people post all of their inner thoughts on social media. So a young person might post something like, I need to get out of here, I'm having a bad day, or I hate my parents, or something along those lines. And those are the things that traffickers look for, because they can jump on that and try to fulfill whatever it is that need is that young person is putting out there into the world.
And then they quickly start gaining that young person's trust. They become that person who fills every need for these young people. So if they're, you know, are having a bad day and they need a ride home from school, if they need somebody to talk to, they become that person where they might not have had that person in any other ways in their life, right? Their parents might be working, they might be from single family homes, you know, they might have conflict with their siblings. For some reason, there's some crack that these young people have, and that trafficker fills every need that they have. So whatever it is and whatever that might look like, they become that person for them. So they're the ones that they're calling at the end of the day when things are not going right. They're the ones that they're reaching out to when they when it's good or bad, right? They're that one person that becomes that constant in their life and that constant support that they haven't had through other avenues. And
Go
ahead.
So it's almost very similar to what the structure of an abusive relationship would look like in like the love bombing phase. Like they're acting like their best friend or their boyfriend or somebody who loves and cares about them, when in reality it's just a tactic to gain their trust before they move into the isolation stage.
And as they start isolating people, then they start building barriers between, you know, their friends or their family, so that person becomes the only person in their life. They want to be that only constant, and they will put up barriers or try to cause conflicts or try to divide them from their family. So they become the one and only person that they're really relying on.
And then that's when the abuse begins. And that's when, you know, they start to, and it doesn't always come in a physical form, but that's when they start to introduce the idea of sex trafficking. Like, I'm giving you all of these things and now you owe me something in return. It's hard to read this slide, I know.
And yet it became a little bit blurry, but again, it's just about the people who we see, or, you know, the trends that we see in human sex trafficking, you know, it just becomes that there's a need and they fill that need. And they're so good at what they do, because these people, they make so much money in their life is about exploiting the weaknesses of others, right? And it doesn't matter what you do in life, or, you know, where you come from or where you grew up, we all have things about us that we don't feel good about, right? So they really make you feel good about the things that you don't feel great about. Or, you know, they are the person that will be there if you hadn't had a lot of support. You know, life is so busy and parents sometimes, you know, aren't able to be there the way they want to be for their kids, or you're not able to support your siblings like you wish that you could. And this person just finds a way to worm their way into this person's life. And it's amazing how quickly they become completely controlling of someone. And I think a lot of times when we see the grooming stage happen, people don't know that it's happening, right? Because it feels good. It feels good, and it feels to get that attention, and it feels good to be wanted, and it feels good to hear all the things that you haven't heard before, right? Like, I'm proud of you, or you're so pretty, or you look lovely, or whatever that is, right? You're so smart. So they, you know, really shower these young women with all the praise, or they, you know, they're buying them gifts, or they're taking them places, and they're exposing them to things that they probably have not experienced really well. And people know what it's like to be, you know, in a new relationship or newly married. And it does feel nice to have that person who's that constant support, that you feel like you can tell anything. And they become that person that no matter what you say, you're always accepted. Where I think a lot of the young people who are people in general who've been trafficked in the past sort of lack that part in their life for whatever reason.
And I think the important thing about that too is that this can happen to absolutely anybody. And certainly there are things that make somebody more vulnerable, which I think we get to later in our presentation. But really at the end of the day, we're all humans. We all have a need for attention and affection and acceptance of others. And having that need in and of itself makes us vulnerable to human trafficking.
And like so many times we've heard, you know, women talk who've been trafficked, and it'll be like their trafficker was the first person who said, you know, I'm proud of you for doing that. You know, so to hear that the first time, you want to continue that feeling, you want to continue to get that praise. So once they start getting that from their trafficker, they will do anything to get back to that point, right? So when the abuse starts or they start to pull away, then that's when they really have the person under their control, because these young ladies and men will do anything that they can to get back to that really good feeling.
And that's how they maintain control, because something that might sound outrageous to us, if somebody asked us to do that to them, these young women are at that point where they've been groomed, and they want to do whatever they can to get that feeling back that they had in the beginning when they were being targeted, that was filling that need. They will do anything to fill that need again, and whatever their trafficker tells them to, and then they have control.
So when we talk about human trafficking, there's two types of what they call pimps. There's what we primarily have seen is the Romeo pimp. So the definition of a Romeo pimp is someone who prides himself on controlling others primarily through psychological manipulation. Although he may shower his victims with affection and gifts, especially during the recruitment phase, the threat of violence is always present. And the other one is the gorilla type pimp, which I haven't seen in the reading that I have done, but it's a pimp who controls his victims almost entirely through violence, through physical violence and force. I think the big thing to remember when it comes to human sex trafficking is when you deal with victims of trafficking, they truly believe that their pimps are their boyfriend. It doesn't matter at certain times, and depending what stage they are in the process, you cannot lead them to believe anything different. They truly believe that their pimp loves them and that they are in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. I met a woman just recently in Cobourg who I believe was a victim of sex trafficking. And, you know, I was saying to her, what's your boyfriend's name? Well, I don't know his last name. Well, when did you meet him? I met him a couple of weeks ago. Okay, well, where does he live? Well, I'm not sure. So I don't know about any of you, and I might be kind of old-fashioned because I'm going to be 40 in a couple of weeks, but if I was in a relationship with someone, I would like to know what his last name is. I would like to know where he lives. I would like to know what he does for a job. But those are all things through these relationships that they withhold and they don't know. You know, this woman wasn't in a big red flag for me was she didn't have any of her own identification. She was just dropped off in Cobourg and just left there. And I'm like, who left you here? My boyfriend did. Well, again, I don't know about any of the other ladies on this call, but if my boyfriend left me on the side of the road in sandals in the winter, I would suggest that relationship was over. But it was so heartbreaking to see her because she truly believed that he was her boyfriend and that he loved her, even though he treated her like she had absolutely no worth. But that's how entrenched this was in her, and that's how deep the control went.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So this was just an excerpt that we got. So I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but you can actually go onto major, and I think they're becoming more aware of it now, but you can go onto major box stores and buy books. This was an excerpt from a book called The Game. So it's basically how to become a human trafficker in one book. So it gives you all the rundowns and the guidelines on how to do it. So these were just some of the excerpts from the book that I got offline. It says, sell the girls the dream of a rich, happy life together. The only catch is she has to sell herself in order for them to achieve that goal. Once she starts prostituting, take all of the money that she makes as payment for all that you've done for her. Disable her social media accounts and completely cut her off from her friends and family. If necessary, threaten to hurt her or family. If she tries to leave, by the time she realizes that the dream you sold her is no longer going to come to fruition, it's too late. There's no going back and there's no leaving. Once she is broken in, you can sell her as many as 15 to 20 people a night. You've brainwashed her into thinking that you truly love her. By this point, there's no leaving. She believes that there's no one in the world who cares about her or she could turn to for help. Finally go out and find yourself another girlfriend. So this is an excerpt from a book that was sold through major box stores, and it basically breaks down all the stages of grooming, right? Sell her the dream, say that we're going to be in a relationship together. I love you. Things are going to be great. You know, and then you talk her into prostituting and selling herself. And then it's like, I'm doing my 50%. So you're going to have to do your 50%. And then it comes to the isolation where you're disabling her social media accounts and you're cutting off from her friends and family and any supports that she had. So you can see that, you know, even in social or in mainstream media, on major box stores, they're basically selling you, you know, a user's 101 guide on how to become a human trafficker.
And I think a big part of that is how the term, even the term pimp, has been glorified in society. It's been seen in like rap music and in movies as being a cool thing, something that people strive to be, with having lots of ladies, lots of money, lots of cash, all of that. So concerningly, younger and younger people are reading this type of material. And I would say that this is very consistent as far as the script would go of a lot of the young ladies that we have seen in our experience. They've gone through this. And I think it's also important that it speaks to how these males see these young women as a commodity, as something that doesn't matter to them, because they can just replace them. As long as they're making them money, then that's all that they care about.
Because I think the thing that, you know, Danielle and I really want people to know about human trafficking is, one, it's really, really hard for police to prove, because the victims are so reluctant to speak with us. And a lot of times they don't see that they're being exploited. And the other thing is, for a male and a female to be stopped in a car, that's not unusual, right? So for us to be able to engage those people, there's a lot of, it's very tricky to get in and ask those right questions, because we as police have a lot of restrictions on what we cannot and cannot do. And it's not like drugs, right? If we, or a firearm, if we go to a car and you saw a firearm sitting on the front seat, that person would immediately be arrested, you know, charged and be before the courts. But when we see a male and a female in a car, you know, it certainly becomes a lot of barriers. And the reality is, you can only sell that handgun to one person one time, or drugs, you can only sell that particular drug one time. But with a male or a female, you can sell them over and over and over and over again, where the risk is so low, but you know, what they get from them, the rewards are so high in terms of the money that these women are generating. So this was just a video. This was done a number of years ago. I'm going to try to play it, and hopefully it will play on my shared screen. This is a young man named Matthew Diego, and he was in court charged with human trafficking offenses here in the city of, well, not here, but in the city of Toronto. And it sort of speaks to what Danielle and I have been trying to communicate about how these pimps see the women that they bring into their lives, and how they treat them, and how they truly feel about them. So if you just hold on 1 second, it's on my desktop here. So I'm hoping if I just hit on this, I'm not great with technology, so do I have to put it over here?
I think so. Can somebody just let us know if they can see the video?
I'll just share my screen again.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
it like a
still-
black? Is it like a
You'll have your
backdrop?
PowerPoint.
Pardon? You just still have the PowerPoint? Okay, hold
Still
on.
have the PowerPoint.
Then I have to exit out and then open that
So
video
I might just have to exit out of this. Hold on.
and exit out of sharing the screen.
Exit show. Screen sharing has stopped. Okay.
And then open the Diego video.
Sorry, just bear with us for one.
So who went outside today? It's a beautiful day.
Can you hear that?
No.
We can't see
Or here, okay.
it. Okay, yes.
Can you hear the video?
No.
We can see it, but can't hear it. On the screen share button, there's a check mark box that you can click for audio and one for video. If you click them both before you screen share.
I think we'll have to pull it.
It's a little tiny box in the lower left of your Zoom screen when you share your screen.
So you have to escape and go back in
Yeah.
and put share sound.
Okay, just hold on. Just give me 1 sec.
There's a dangerous game being played in Toronto.
That's better.
Oh, did you guys get weird feedback or no?
A little.
Have a microphone on or another tech device open, there will be feedback.
Because then this won't play. The problem.
Is the video available online somewhere or on YouTube?
Okay, so we're gonna try this again.
There's a dangerous game being played in Toronto and across the country. Romeo pimps who promise love and security, then enslave girls as young as 12. Moved up and down highways, from hotel to hotel, and motel to motel. Matthew Diecko has played the game and he knows it well. Charged with trafficking, kidnapping, assault, forcible confinement. He awaits trial.
Sex is a part of life. I think a woman, if she wants to make money off it, she shouldn't have to go to jail or somebody that's helping her. It's her life, it's her body. Why should anybody be getting in trouble? Why should the Johns be getting arrested because they bought a woman? Some people don't want a relationship. They just want to get what they want and go home. No strings attached, no relation, no feelings, no fighting, no quick business deal.
How do you get a girl to fall in love with you and get a girl to be willing to do this?
It just happens. Like, most of these girls, like I said, they're broken. It's not hard. You just gotta answer their call. You get in there, you find the crack. Like, some are drugs, some are just, they need to hear I love you.
But if they just want someone to love them, this guy's not talking about loving her.
Oh, I know, but that's what she believes. It's the illusion. Be there for them. Tell them what they want to hear. You tell them, well, we need to put money away. I'm gonna do what I do. See, I'm putting my 50 in. You have to do your 50. So there's another way you can have sex with guys. But don't worry, I'm gonna love you. You know, I'm gonna go and sell drugs if that's what I'm doing on the side, or I'm gonna be making money and I'll be there to take care of you. At the end of the night, you're home with me. Every girl's had that fantasy wedding in that house with a pink fence. You sell it to her. And she'll do it.
Why will she do it?
You just sold her a dream. Some of these girls are broken. It fixes them.
What fixes them?
knowing someone out there cares. The illusion of it, right? Me, I don't let that happen. Because I'm not going to sit and lie to them and say, oh, I love you. I don't. I love my money.
And would you call that being a pimp?
No, I don't know what you would call it. Not a pimp, a manager.
I think will hear me again.
Yep.
So I think that video basically just sums it up, right? Better than Danielle and I could ever communicate. It speaks to what we were saying, right? He says it himself, although he calls himself a manager. I'm sure you guys noticed how it said pimping across his knuckles. So he's basically saying, right, you find the crack and you sell them the dream that you think, it's going to be my 50% and your 50%, we're going to be in this together. And that's just not the reality of it. But they're selling these young women a dream. Like you said, you find the crack. And then they'll just do whatever they want to do. So that's, what Danielle and I were trying to sum up. You basically heard it right from a pimp himself, although that's not how he identifies. He identifies himself as a manager. Certainly, I think Danielle and I would call him pretty textbook definition of a pimp, and how how they identify themselves and how they treat these young women and how they feel about it.
Where's the play button?
Sorry, Danielle and I are not great on technology. We really are happy. Click on it. I apologize.
It was working.
But that was a special. I don't know if you guys have any interest in looking into any of that farther, but it was a special done by the Toronto Star, and they did a whole series. I think it's on YouTube, and it looks, so you can see.
Yeah. And I think too, it's some of the things that he says there really resonate with some of the things that we were saying earlier. For example, I'm going to tell her I love her, and that's what she believes, but I don't. I love my money. And the sad thing is that these young girls truly believe that. And then that makes it even harder for us as police to try to get, if we come across a young lady who is a victim of human trafficking, they believe they love this person. So similarly to how difficult it can be to get victims of domestic violence to come forward and provide a statement, it's can be equally as hard, if not harder sometimes, to get human trafficking victims to provide a statement against this person that they love and they depend on. Maybe.
Sorry, I don't know why this isn't going back.
If you want to continue your slideshow, go to the upper left, and the second little screen in is from current slide. If you just click on that, you can continue your slideshow.
Cops are not great with technology, I'm not gonna lie.
Just the upper left hand corner under the file.
Okay, file. Oh, there we go. It won't even let us click on it.
I can see. Oh.
It won't let me click on files. I'm not sure.
Oh, well, you don't need to click on the file, but underneath it, there says one little screen says from beginning, and right beside it, it says from current slide.
No, from all it says is paste right under file.
Oh.
I'm just gonna exit out, maybe go back.
We'll just try again.
We'll get it right eventually. I do apologize. I'm just gonna exit out maybe. And then
so we watched that video over and over again, and it's still just at the end, especially when he says I'm not a pimp, I'm a manager, just gives me the creeps every time. Just because what he's put all these young women through. And the sad reality too, from a policing perspective, is from what we see in the media and what we see in court case outcomes, people who are convicted of human trafficking and go to jail don't end up spending very much time behind bars. There was one case not that long ago, maybe 2 years ago, where two men were convicted. I believe it was in the Durham region. And they were convicted of trafficking a young woman who was under the age of 18. And I think that their sentence was 18 months. And they ended up appealing it because they said that it was too harsh of a sentence, which is just a horrible thing to think about. Do you get it?
I'm not sure what I've done to this, but
As long as you guys can see our slide,
slide.
we'll just move on.
So I haven't shared my screen now.
So when we started talking about human trafficking, the average age of somebody who was being trafficked or forced or coerced into this lifestyle was probably in the 15-year age range. And then more recently, it's gotten younger and younger. So we're at the point now where the average age of entry into human trafficking is between 11 and 13 years old. And again, I speak about young girls just because in the high 90s is the percentage of victims who are female who are involved in sex trafficking versus males. Another thing that makes somebody more vulnerable to human trafficking is being a runaway. So 1 in 6 were runaways, and 86% of the runaways were in the care of social services at the time that they ran away. So they were in the care of Children's Aid Society at the time that they ran away and were coerced or forced into the sex trade.
So Danielle and I were actually at a training a little while ago. I guess it was quite some time now before COVID. And we actually found it really interesting because they were saying that over and over again, when researchers and police officers spoke with victims of human trafficking, they were seeing a common theme or risk factors of things that they had been exposed to. So one was childhood sexual violence, intimate partner violence, unexpected death or of a loved one, which actually kind of surprised me. Death threats, stranger violence, and robbery. So many of the victims that the police were encountering, those were the common threats that they were seeing in some capacity, that the victims had one or several of those common risk factors.
And again, when you think about it, going back to the grooming stage, people who have experienced these types of things in their lives have some sort of trauma or which could cause a need that opens them up to be filled by a trafficker.
So why do victims, so for us and for police in general, victims failing to report is a huge problem. A lot of them, one, don't see that they are victims of human trafficking because they don't see that they are being exploited, because as Danielle and I were speaking about, and as was highlighted in the video we just showed, these young ladies or victims see themselves as actually as a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. So that's one of the major problems, is why victims fail to report, because they don't actually see themselves as victims. But some of the other reasons and common threads we saw were fear for their own lives. They do not understand that they're victims of human trafficking. They've been taught to distrust others, especially law enforcement and other government agencies. Be completely unaware of and if you're not Canadian or you're not sure, you can be completely unaware of your rights or may not be intentionally misinformed about your rights in Canada. Fear for their families or other loved ones, or feel threatened that the traffickers will harm their families if they report the situation and or cooperate with law enforcement. So because these young people people in general have so much distrust for police, that's one of the huge reasons why we can't get them to report. One, they don't see that they are victims, and two, they have such a distrust for police or anyone in a position of authority that they don't disclose what's happened to them.
And a lot of times too, the traffickers will tell the victims that what they're doing is illegal, or they'll tell the victims, like, you shouldn't talk to the police because you'll be the one who ends up arrested. So, and that's not the case at all. It's not true, but they have no reason not to believe them in those scenarios. So then they don't want to tell us what's happening because they're afraid that they're going to get arrested or that they'll go to jail. And another reason that they don't report is just it can be shame too. So now, even though they were forced or coerced into this lifestyle, they've done some things that it would be very hard to come out and tell a loved one or a stranger if it's a police officer. Yeah, this happened to me and I was forced to have sex with 15 to 20 people in one day. That's not going to be something that's easy to just bring forward. So they feel a lot of shame and don't come forward to report.
So the next one are red flags. There's some clear black and white indicators of human trafficking. So if you have a young person in your life, or you're interacting with someone and suddenly they start exhibiting some different behavior. Some of those can be concerning. So exhibiting some change in their behavior. So if they were always doing something and then suddenly that behavior stops and they start going to do something completely different, that could be a red flag. If suddenly there's just a marked change in their behavior, they rarely respond to phone calls and or messages and disappear for long periods of time. So that can also be a red flag, right? Where are you going? What are you doing? Who are you with? Unexplained weight loss because they can be told that they're too fat or they might not be being fed appropriately. That can be another sign of human trafficking. Show signs of malnourishment and being overworked. Unexplained injuries and bruises. Are unfamiliar with the neighborhood they live, work in. Do not have a passport or any of their major pieces of identification. They don't speak on their own behalf. Sudden addiction to alcohol or drugs, and possession of hotel room keys or motel room keys. Those are all key things that, I mean, I'm not saying they're all indicative of human trafficking on their own, but suddenly, you know, if you have a young female or male that you are interacting with and suddenly, you know, they have, you know, a Gucci bag or something really expensive that you know that they can't afford when they're in grade 11 at high school, you know, they've got $2,000 or $3,000 bags, their hair is always done, they've gone for tans, their nails are always done. Those can also be red flags because where's the money coming from, right? To pay for all those services. Also, if suddenly they have hotel keys that you're finding in the wash or in their pockets, another huge red flag. And I don't know if people know, but it's actually, you're not allowed to hold other people's identification. So if Danielle and I were in a relationship and I was withholding her identification, that's actually not allowed. You're not allowed to possess more than your own identification, same as expired licenses. You're not allowed to have a number of expired licenses. It's an offense. So if suddenly they don't have control of their own identification, that's also a problem. So the young person that I interacted with here in Cobourg a few weeks ago, she didn't have any of her own identification. She wasn't able to provide any of that. The only thing she had was a number of cell phones. She had 3 phones in her possession, which is also a red flag. Why does one person need 3 phones?
So sometimes too, if pimps are targeting younger girls, they find that it might be easier for a younger female to put their trust in another female who might be a little bit older. So somebody that they could look up to or take to parties with them, or somebody who they see as cool, or somebody that they can use to recruit. So that could be a red flag as well if all of a sudden a young lady starts hanging out with somebody who's a couple years older who is introducing them to new friends, new party scenes, going out, staying places overnight, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think a real trend in human trafficking, since Danielle and I sort of started to learn about, is that we see that pimps are using women to recruit into what they call the game. And I think that was something that we never really saw in the past. But women who start in are brought into human trafficking can sort of move up the hierarchy, right? And so then they become in control of the newer people that are working, and suddenly they all believe that they are in a relationship with sort of quote unquote the pimp, but they are females who will exploit other females and sort of become in a competition with them and they will often become the people who are actually the enforcers. So there is violence that is doled out, that it'll also often be that one female that's doing that, not the males himself. So this was just a stat that I had found, that because a lot of people believe that these are not, you know, Canadian citizens, they don't come from good families. They believe that a lot of them are, you know, refugees or have come in, have immigrated to Canada, but that's not actually the fact. That 93% of human sex trafficking victims in Canada are Canadian born. So, you know, these are our own children. It doesn't matter what law. I know we say that a lot of them are runaways or in care of social services. And yes, that's probably does make up the majority of these young women, but that's not always the case. They can come from any walk of life. It doesn't matter necessarily what their background is. They're all vulnerable to that. 14% was the average age of human sex trafficking in Canada. And in 24 hours or less is all it takes for someone to fall victim to a human trafficker. So that's how quickly this process can happen. And it says the 401 is a major corridor for human trafficking in Ontario because it's how people travel, right? If you travel down the 401, it doesn't take very long to see, you know, a motel sign or a hotel sign where you can quickly, you know, just get off the exit ramp and it's right there, which is easily accessible for the traffickers. And 3 years is the time it takes for the victim to begin to recover from the process. And I'll be honest, I don't know that anyone truly ever recovers from being a victim of human trafficking, because it just truly affects every aspect of their person direct to their core, right? Everything they believe, everything they thought, everything that they were led to believe is just then gone. So human trafficking is this, again, I apologize, is a little bit dated, but it just shows you how lucrative it is for human trafficking. So if they're saying that like one person can generate over $280,000. And that, you know, a human trafficker doesn't just have one person that they're human trafficking, right? They have multiple victims. So if they had 5 victims, they would be generating over $1 million in revenue from these young women. And, you know, at almost no risk to themselves, because they're not the ones in the room. They're just the ones answering the phone call. They're the ones that are setting up the dates. They're the ones that are sending the Johns to the hotel room. So on a day-to-day basis, the pimps are never seen, right? They're the ones that are hiding in the cars, or, you know, hiding out in the parking lot, or hiding in the stairwells, where these young women have no idea who's coming to their hotel room. They're just expected to open the door.
Yeah, it's low risk and high reward for sure.
So Canada, and we just want to touch upon this, Canada's first criminal code offenses specifically charting human trafficking were enacted in 2005. The criminal code now contains 6 human trafficking offenses punishable by maximum penalties as high as life imprisonment. But just to be clear, I have kind of moved into a different facet in my career right now, but I certainly still do look, and I've never seen anyone get, you know, life imprisonment or anywhere near that for human trafficking. And most of the time, even when we do get these matters to court, which is really rarely, the victims are so victimized and they have so much trauma from what they've been through. In order to get them to testify, it's almost impossible, because the court process is so drawn out that in order to support these women through the appropriate facets, in order to get them to court to testify, unfortunately, just generally don't get there. They often go back into the game just because it's what they know. And a lot of them don't have any other options. As Danielle was saying, they're disconnected from their family, or they don't have family. They have so much shame and they don't see their own value anymore because of what they've been through.
And they come out, they're traumatized by this. They come out of this and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to function without their trafficker. They don't know how to make even just minor decisions without their trafficker telling them what to do, because they've controlled their behavior for so long, which can create a whole host of traumatic issues, anxiety, stress, and a lot of times it's just too much for them, and they'll go back to their trafficker, and then it can put the brakes on the whole court process, as far as now you have an uncooperative victim who's back in that lifestyle and back with that person and going to do whatever it is that they say to do. I personally don't think I've seen any sentences for human trafficking that have been over 2 years.
And I think the biggest thing for law enforcement is when we're asking women to, and I keep saying women, but when we're asking victims to step away from the life that they've known, we as law enforcement have to do a better job to support these women, because we have to make sure that we are meeting every need, whether, and a lot of them come out with addiction. They have no money, no identification. They have health needs, like healthcare needs that have not been addressed, because they're being told when to eat, when to sleep, and they have no idea who's coming to their door. They're put in a hotel. They don't know, you know, sometimes what town they're in. And someone just knocks on their door and they're expected to complete sexual services. So we as police need to become that person to meet all of their needs. We have to have somewhere for them to. So I was just reading the question. So we have, as law enforcement, have to be able to meet all of their basic needs. We can't just take them and put them in a hotel or put them in a treatment center and think that that's going to be enough. It's not. When Danielle and I did some training, this was a number of years ago, one of the officers that we trained with was saying, you know, the victim was then calling him and saying, you know, can I have something to eat now? Can I go to the, you know, can I go outside now? Because she was so used to someone controlling every facet of her life that she had then just imprinted on that officer to become that person, right? So it's just, these cases are so complex, and we're still learning so much about how to support the victims, because we don't always do a great job in the past, because we haven't had a clear understanding of how compounded their trauma is. So we're definitely trying to do a better, we're trying to learn from our mistakes in law enforcement and do better, but it's still a very complicated issue. And sadly, it's becoming more predominant, right? With, you know, hotels, as you say, where they are, social media, anybody can post an ad. So it's definitely a hard thing to track. So I think that's really all we had for our thing. And I think the big thing we want to say is, if there's a hotel in your community, it's happening there. There's no community in Ontario, in Canada, that's immune to human trafficking. It happens in every community. It happens here. As I said, it was just a couple of weeks ago that I interacted with a young lady, and I think Danielle's aware of it. She wouldn't admit that she was any type of victim. Outreach support was, you know, offered. She didn't have very kind words for the police, but we know that it's here, right? We can't turn a blind eye to it. So we really do a lot of work, or pre-COVID, to try to, you know, work with our hotels so they know what some of the red flags are, so that we can do the best that we can to support people in our own community.
And human trafficking is a crime that is allowed to happen in communities that are not informed about human trafficking because, like Janice said earlier, you wouldn't think twice about a young male and a young female walking into a hotel together or driving down the street together. And I don't think we touched on this, but the average age of pimps is, I think it's like 22 to 24, in that early 20s range. So if you were to see two young people walking somewhere, then you might not think twice about it, but communities that are informed and educated, those are the communities that might see something and think, okay, something's off here, something's not quite right, and be able to report to police or check in on somebody or something along those lines. But if we're all unaware and we have the blindfold on that this isn't happening in our communities, then those are the communities that human trafficking is running rampant in.
And that's just our contact information if anyone had any questions or anything for us. I know this was pretty quick and I do apologize for the technical issues. Definitely not my strong suit. So I think
we're live performers, not
that's right. That's our strong suit. And I don't know how to get back to the chat. Do you?
I think you just stop sharing the screen. And then go over and go down to it's
right there. I should have put this
So
on.
Danielle, Janice and Danielle, before we do a formal thank you, I have two of my Rotary colleagues who have been monitoring the chat. So I'm going to turn to them to ask some of the questions that they have seen in the chat. Joseph and John, please.
There are actually quite a lot of questions, Beth, but I'll go through them one at a time, and if we have time, you'll get them all. The first question was, is it always young people who are trafficked?
Certainly not always. It does happen more frequently to younger people. I'm not sure what the statistics would say, but certainly what we see would be females who are in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, that sort of age range. I've never personally seen anybody that's over that age. Not that it doesn't happen, because I'm sure it does. But sadly, I think part of the reason for that is there's a market for younger girls. And that's the reason that you see the age decreasing too, is because, again, sadly, there's a market for younger and younger and younger females for the people who are purchasing these sexual services. So that's what also young people are more vulnerable and easily manipulated. So that's where the targets are with the traffickers.
Okay. Next one, how can a book that advocates for a crime be sold in a bookstore? Is that not illegal?
So I don't think it comes with necessarily a human trafficking 101 guide. You know, I think the book is called something like A Pimp's Guide or something.
Or Pimpology or something along those lines.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily know why a big box store would think that that was appropriate to put in their shelves for sale. I do think that I think human trafficking, really the light has been shining on it, and for a number of years. So I do think that they're moving more away from it and trying to be more educated. But I think where there's a supply, there's a demand, right? And if there's a demand, unfortunately, it's going to be sold. And clearly there wasn't enough demand to get it into those stores. So I think until we can deal with the demand, the supply will always be there.
Okay. What percentage of traffic victims are Indigenous?
I would not be able to tell you what the statistic is. I think that there's, there's a whole unique set of vulnerabilities that might come with being Indigenous. But I couldn't say what the...
No, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to speak to that either. I wouldn't want to give the wrong information.
Okay. How often have you seen female perpetrators of trafficking?
So I think that that's definitely something that we're seeing more and more. And I think that although we don't really like to use the term, there actually is a common term for a female who works for a male, and she's called the bottom bitch. And she is the one that really is, look at it, she's the one who takes, sorry if that was offensive to anyone, but that's the term that they use. And she's the one that really controls it. But I do think that we're seeing a lot more of women exploiting women because, we don't necessarily want to be controlled by men, and they see how easy it is to exploit their friends or to exploit people who they pretend are their friends. So why, I do think that women are definitely moving forward and taking a leading role in their exploitation of other women.
It also removes the pimp that much further from the actual crime, right? Because the reality is that it's the females who are the bottom bitches, started more often than not being trafficked themselves, and they've worked their way up that scale. So they're also victims themselves. So then it's hard for us as police, because they're the ones who are essentially committing the crime under the control of the pimp, but they themselves are also victims and have been victimized by this trafficker. So it's a very complicated hierarchy.
Okay. Do you think that this will be a problem with Ukrainian refugees coming into Canada who are children and very traumatized already?
So I hope that Ukrainian refugees will have lots of support systems. I think, unfortunately, no matter where you come from in life and no matter, your background or what you've experienced, I think anyone could be a victim. I don't think you can say, just because they're coming from Ukraine or they're refugees, I have a 12-year-old son, and like, knock on wood, that never happens, but he could be a victim, right?
Yeah.
It just depends.
And we've seen that before in some victims that we've met, who were young women who were in college, came from well-off families, were doing well in school, and then, met this older guy and fell into this lifestyle very easily. And at the same time, we've met young women who were regular drug users, living on the streets and very vulnerable, who have fallen into this lifestyle. So it just goes back to, it can happen to anyone. Certainly the risk factor is there, because there will be a whole host of vulnerabilities that come with being part of that population. But it can really happen to anyone.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when they're going through that grooming stage, I think they're almost in too deep before they realize that anything is wrong, right? And by then, it's that shame that Danielle was talking about, that it's really hard to then break out of that cycle, because you suddenly are like, holy smokes, like, this is like way beyond what I realized what it was. And I think when people start to put those red flags and pieces together, it's almost too late. They've already become, victimized, and they're already in the game, and then it's hard to get out.
Okay, I think probably this is the last one because of time. Do you think someone who was a victim of trafficking is a high risk candidate for suicide?
Certainly they could be. It's going to take a huge toll on somebody's mental health. And I think that a lot of victims come out of human trafficking, if they do come out of human trafficking, with post-traumatic stress disorder, with depression, with anxiety, with a whole host of mental health issues that need to be addressed with some deep therapy and some deep counseling. So certainly if all of that went unsupported and untreated, then it could, I don't want to create a linkage between the two things, but it certainly could lead in that direction if somebody was unsupported.
Yeah, and I think the bigger thing that we would see statistically is that they just go back into the lifestyle that they have left, right? Because they don't feel like they have any other options. They don't feel like they have any worth. So it's just easier to go back to the lifestyle where they are making a large sum of money, and whether they choose to work for a pimp in the future, or whether they choose, because it's not illegal to sell sexual services in Canada. It's not illegal to be a sex trade worker. So I think for them, that just becomes the easiest route to support themselves, because that's the lifestyle that they know. And like I said, they just feel like their value is so little that they often go back to that lifestyle, sometimes just in a different form.
I know there's a lot of other questions. I don't know if they can be, if somebody could send them to us, if you're interested in us answering them, we could type an email response to the questions and then send them back to somebody to be distributed.
We can work on those tomorrow if anybody has questions.
Or if you have additional questions, you guys can email us for sure.
Well, I think Janice and Danielle, you've done a great job of answering all the questions that I've been monitoring in the chat, but should anyone have a specific question right now or subsequent to the presentation, if you let me know, send it to me, and I certainly will send it on to our presenters for a response. At this point in time, I would like to turn to District Governor Ron Dick to thank our speakers.
Thank you, past District Governor Beth, and thank you, Janice and Danielle, for a very sobering topic. Our district rests on the 401, which is the trafficking highway that you talk about. And I think expanding the awareness of everyone on this call of what does happen in our own backyard and what we do see going up and down our highway is a large step towards providing some solution to this. I don't know, I'm just sobered by the whole thing, the same way when I saw your last presentation when I was sitting in Muskoka, and I can't begin to thank you enough for drawing our attention to this and drawing our attention to the fact that it is in our own backyard. And we do have to pay attention to this to help be part of the solution. So Janice and Danielle, we're going to make a donation in honor of your presentation today to the Rotary Foundation to say thank you for your time here today. And we do appreciate all your efforts, and we do look forward to having continued help to be able to provide a solution to this problem.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, I just want to say we really appreciate that people still want to, hear about this topic and are still really looking to learn about it, because as Danielle was saying, we can only work to, we're never probably going to stop it as that is, but if we can create awareness and have people ask more questions and, start those conversations, that's the biggest thing, right? If you don't know, ask. And I know it can be very awkward to have a conversation, especially with young people. I have a 16-year-old and a almost 14-year-old, and I can hardly get them to speak to me on a good day. But it's about engaging those awkward conversations, right? And asking them, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to come out of your room and talk to me today? Not really. Well, I don't care, because you're going to sit at the table and have a conversation with me, right? It's about sort of breaking down those barriers, because we've become very much a society where we live on our phones. So it's about just engaging those young people and asking those questions, right? So that would just be the biggest takeaway. So we just really appreciate you willing to hear us speak.
So thank you for that comment. Having been in a household with 2 adolescent males, yep, that's exactly how you characterize it. Just before we leave, we have a question or a comment. Indigenous women and girls comprise a disproportionate percentage of trafficked persons for the purpose of sexual exploitation in Canada. Do either or both of you have a quick comment for that?
Well, when you think about it in broader terms of society, I guess, Indigenous women and girls comprise a disproportionate number of a lot of categories that they're a very vulnerable group. And so it makes sense that they would be a disproportionate amount, because they're disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. They're disproportionately represented in
care system.
Yeah, in social services, and like we spoke about before, being part of social services and Children's Aid Society is an added risk factor to being a target for human trafficking. So it does. Sadly, it makes sense that that's a statistic that we're seeing, and I think that there should be, and I know that there are some, but there should be more programming that's targeted specifically to the vulnerabilities around young Indigenous women and girls, for sure.
Yeah, because I think with that population too, what we often see is they're removed from their communities and immediately taken into communities where they're not familiar, right? To get the support. So I think that immediately sort of sets them up to be more victimized. So that definitely makes sense, because some of those risk factors we're unfortunately already creating for them when we take them out of their support network and put them somewhere else to be supported. Then we've sort of already set them up.
That comment. So Janice and Danielle, as a Cobourg resident, thank you very much for taking the time tonight to speak to us. We really appreciate your talk, and it was very insightful, and I'm sure you've given us a lot of food for thought. So before we wrap up tonight, in the last 2 minutes, I believe we have Bill Empey online, and Bill is going to speak to us about our May Tuesday Talks.
Thank you, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Right, Tuesday Talk in May 10th. I am the district representative for Honoring Indigenous People for HIP. Many of you know HIP, and I'll introduce a little bit more about HIP in May. We want to, at HIP, introduce you to a new and unique exhibition of Indigenous history and culture that's being developed in Muskoka. It's called Miskoaki, Confluence of Cultures. And it's an amazing new exhibit designed for the Muskoka Steamship and Discovery Center in Gravenhurst. And visitors at the exhibition will experience the 10,000-year history of Indigenous people in that area, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, and the Mohawk people. And the exhibit is designed in an intriguing way where you take a canoe trip through the history, through the geography and the culture of our region. The featured speaker will be Tim Johnson. Tim was for 10 years at the Smithsonian Institute, and he was the award-winning designer of exhibits at the National Museum of the American Indian. Tim is Mohawk. He's from the Six Nations community in Brantford, Ontario. And HIP enthusiastically endorses Miskoaki as an amazing project. We want to focus Rotary clubs in the district on how they can engage in this exciting approach to Indigenous history and how you can introduce it into your community. So this is coming up on May 10th. I hope you all can join us then. It's going to be a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And just a personal thank to everybody who joined us tonight. I hope you enjoyed our April Tuesday talks, and we look forward to seeing you in May. So thank you for joining us. Stay well. Take care.
Thanks,
Hey,
Beth,
everyone.
and thanks, everyone. Good night.